April 18, 1945. Berlin. The sound came before the sight. A low, distant hum rolling over the ruins of the city like an approaching storm that no one could stop. Smoke drifted through streets that no longer had names. Fires burned where ministries once stood. Glass crunched beneath the boots of messengers who still ran despite knowing there was nowhere left to run. At the top of a shattered command building, a German Luftwaffe general stood alone at a broken window. The cold spring air cut through his coat. Below him, Berlin smoldered in slow motion. The city did not explode anymore. It only burned. He raised his field glasses. High above the smoke, dozens of silver shapes emerged from the gray sky. American fighters. P-51 Mustangs. Perfect formation. Perfect spacing. Perfect control. No flak reached them. No German aircraft rose to meet them. The sky was empty of defenders. And in that silent sky, the general felt something tighten inside his chest. Not fear. Recognition. If stories like this remind you that real history still breathes beneath the rubble, subscribe to WW2 Frontline Legends and tell us where you are watching from around the world. Every place adds another voice to the past. For years, he had commanded men with certainty carved into orders and reinforced with steel. He had watched pilots salute before boarding aircraft that would never return. He had announced victories that came wrapped in casualties. War had always followed a brutal rhythm: attack and counterattack, loss and replacement, destruction and recovery. But what he saw now shattered that rhythm. The Mustangs flew as if the sky already belonged to them, as if Berlin itself had already fallen and merely had not been told. Far below, air raid sirens wailed too late. Anti-aircraft crews stood idle beside guns with no shells. Fuel dumps were dry. Runways were rubble. The Luftwaffe still existed on paper. It no longer existed in reality. Behind the general, radios crackled with fragments of messages that never finished. Operators whispered more than they spoke. Maps hung on the wall with pins that no longer mattered. Then the door burst open. An adjutant stumbled inside, breathless, carrying a decoding sheet still warm from the machine. The message had been intercepted minutes earlier. Not from the Americans. From German units, still scattered across what remained of Europe. The text was broken. Signal interference had shredded half the transmission. But one sentence cut through the static with terrifying clarity. Western command has gone silent. No orders. No resistance. The general read the line twice. Then he lowered the paper slowly. For the first time, he understood that the war was not ending with a final battle. It was ending with a quiet collapse. The machine that had once shaken the world was simply stopping. Outside, the Mustangs continued their slow, confident pass over Berlin. No bombs fell. No guns fired. They flew as if on parade, as if displaying a victory that no one in the city had the power to contest. One aircraft suddenly broke formation. The general tracked it instinctively through his binoculars. The fighter dipped its wings toward the heart of the city in a slow, controlled motion. A gesture that looked almost deliberate. And then he saw it. Beneath the cockpit, painted faintly against the silver skin, was a marking he had seen before. Not on an American aircraft. On a German prototype. His breath caught without sound. Years earlier, buried in classified files now scattered beneath bombing raids, he had approved a limited exchange of experimental research. Not weapons. Not fully formed designs. Only theoretical alloys. Thermal resistance studies. Cooling vent concepts that engineers had sworn would never survive combat stress. He had signed off on the project, believing it would die on drafting tables. Yet now the shape beneath that American cockpit matched a design once sketched in German ink. The cooling vent placement. The alloy stress markings. Even the slight reshaping of the fuselage near the engine cowling. What he had dismissed as unfinished had crossed an ocean and returned perfected. The realization struck deeper than any bomb. The enemy had not only defeated Germany in the air. They had surpassed it using pieces of its own forgotten ambitions. The Mustang leveled its wings and returned to formation. The group moved on toward the east, disappearing into haze and distance. Silence followed. Not the silence of peace. The silence of inevitability. Inside the command room, the illusion of control dissolved. Operators stared at dead frequencies. Couriers stood waiting for orders that would never come. Maps still showed fronts that no longer existed in truth. The general remained at the window. He understood something terrifying. The war had already been decided elsewhere, by factories beyond reach, by supply chains untouched by bombing, by engineers working in safety while Berlin burned, by decisions made far beyond this city, beyond his power, beyond even the ambitions of those who had started it all. Yet one question remained, cold and unanswered. If the Americans now flew German designs refined and weaponized, what else had crossed that invisible line between enemy and ally while no one was watching? What secrets had already changed sides? The general lowered his binoculars and placed them on the cracked stone ledge. From deep within the ruined city, distant artillery thundered weakly, like an echo of a war already finished. He did not know yet how Berlin would fall, only that it would, and that the sky had already chosen its victor. At the peak of that silent realization, remember to subscribe to WW2 Frontline Legends and tell us where in the world you are watching from. History connects us across every border, every ruin, every generation. The general turned slowly from the window. Behind him, the underground command bunker pulsed with fading life. Maps still glowed beneath dim lamps. Radios still waited for voices that would never return. Above him, the sky belonged to someone else. And Berlin was only beginning to understand why. The city moved in slow paralysis beneath the general as he descended into the bunker. Each step echoed through concrete corridors scarred by vibration fractures. The air grew heavier the deeper he went. Oil, sweat, burnt wiring, the last breath of a command structure that had once directed entire air fleets across continents. Reports kept arriving in fragments. Rail lines severed, fuel convoys destroyed before reaching the outskirts. Replacement aircraft sitting idle for lack of pilots. Pilots standing by for lack of aircraft. A machine that no longer connected to itself. He stopped at the central operations room. A massive wall map still glowed faintly under emergency lighting. Front lines marked in colored pins had not been updated in days. Some positions, shown as strongholds, had already ceased to exist. Others clung to terrain that no longer mattered. An officer read aloud the most recent confirmed report. A group of Mi-262 jets had attempted interception north of the city at dawn. None returned. No wreckage confirmed. No radio distress. Just absence. The general did not respond. His attention drifted back to the silver aircraft in the sky. The marking beneath that cockpit stayed burned into his thoughts. It was not the marking itself that haunted him. It was what it meant. Years earlier, when the research exchange had been approved, Germany still believed in the myth of invincibility through innovation. If a weapon failed, it was only because it had not yet been perfected. If the enemy advanced, it was only because greater machines had not yet rolled off German assembly lines. The project he had approved was meant to solve an overheating flaw in long-range engine performance. The alloy composition was revolutionary on paper. The cooling geometry untested. The engineers warned it might never work under sustained combat stress. So he had buried it. Now that same concept flew over Berlin, wrapped in American aluminum. Another message arrived. This one carried worse news. A Luftwaffe command group attempting relocation to the south had been captured intact. No resistance. No pursuit. They surrendered without firing a shot. The war machine was not being destroyed. It was being absorbed. The general felt the first crack form in the wall that had held his certainty upright for years. Below the silence of halted radios, an older sound returned. Footsteps. He remembered another command room years earlier. Another map. Another city. Paris. London. Rotterdam. Once the sky had belonged to him. Once contrails had meant German dominance. Once enemy pilots fled instead of roamed freely. That world felt like a story told by someone else. The truth pressed closer now. The battlefield no longer needed German defeat to function. It simply moved around Germany without asking. From the operations desk came a quiet question from one of the younger officers. Why are they not bombing us now? The general did not answer at once. Because they no longer need to. The words formed in his mind before they left his mouth. Berlin was already neutralized from the air. No factories operated at scale. No fuel flowed uninterrupted. No organized air defense remained. Bombing now would only waste payload on a city that could no longer fight back. The Mustangs were not attacking the capital. They were demonstrating its irrelevance. At that realization, the full weight of what had happened pressed into the room. If this turning point in history reaches you the same way it reaches those who lived it, subscribe to WW2 Frontline Legends and tell us where you are watching from around the world. History travels farther than any aircraft ever did. The general moved back toward the bunker stairwell. With each step upward, the ground trembled faintly beneath distant artillery. The sounds did not shake the walls the way they once had. They simply reminded the city that the war had not yet officially ended. Above ground, smoke rolled across collapsed rooftops like slow tidewater. Civilians hurried through alleyways with bundles of whatever could still be carried. No one looked up anymore. Only the general looked up. The sky remained empty now. The Mustangs had passed, but their presence still lingered like a message written in vapor. And beneath that message lay the deeper wound. The secret that was never meant to return. In a sealed office near the center of the structure, he unlocked a file cabinet that had not been opened since the first major Allied landings. Dust coated the top. He slid a folder free. Inside lay the prototype diagrams, cooling vent placement, alloy ratios, stress tolerance margins, experimental airflow channels. Every line matched what he had seen beneath that passing cockpit. The Americans had not stolen a finished weapon. They had taken a ghost of a concept and given it a body. The second realization struck with cruel clarity. Germany had lost the innovation war before it lost the aerial war. If this hidden transformation inside the skies grips you, subscribe to WW2 Frontline Legends and tell us where you are watching from around the world. These silent turning points shaped everything that followed. A junior engineer once attached to the project came to mind. A quiet man who had argued against abandoning the research, who had insisted the flaw could be solved with time, who vanished from records after a transfer request to a coastal testing station. The general had signed the denial. Now that denial flew above Berlin as an American weapon. He closed the folder slowly. Outside, a group of transports rumbled past on wrecked streets toward the southern exit routes. Trucks packed with wounded, radios, documents, whatever could still move. The Great Retreat had already begun in motion, if not yet in proclamation. Then the radio crackled again. A final message from the east. Soviet armor sighted less than 50 kilometers from the city perimeter. No counteroffensive planned. No fallback prepared. Only delay. At that moment, the general realized the war had split into two battles, still unfolding at different speeds. Above Berlin, the war was already finished. On the ground, it was still devouring what remained. He stepped back to the ruined window. For a brief instant, sunlight broke through the haze and struck the broken stone at his feet. Dust swirled in golden shafts. Somewhere in the distance, an engine roared. Not a fighter, a transport. Evacuation. The war was now measured in what could be saved, not what could be won. If the idea that history can pivot without warning resonates with you, subscribe to WW2 Frontline Legends and tell us where you are watching from around the world. Every voice keeps these moments alive. The general rested his hands on the cold ledge. The city that had once been the beating heart of an empire now waited quietly for its fate to arrive from multiple directions at once. What haunted him most was not the collapse. It was the efficiency of it. The sky had changed ownership without a single formal surrender. He had spent his life preparing for overwhelming force. He had not prepared for overwhelming inevitability. Behind him, the bunker lights flickered as generators strained against fuel shortages that would soon silence them as well. Ahead of him, the sky remained open, and somewhere beyond that sky, the question still lingered unanswered. How many decisions made in quiet rooms long before had already written this ending, and who had truly been steering the course of a war when no one was looking? The air over Berlin remained still. Only the war below it raged on. The final days folded in on themselves without ceremony. No grand announcements. No sweeping counteroffensives. Only the slow tightening of distance as armies moved closer from every direction at once. Inside the bunker, the sounds of command thinned to scattered echoes. Radios fell silent one by one as generators failed. Maps lost their meaning as fronts blurred into overlapping shadows. Couriers stopped arriving altogether. The war no longer traveled by message. It arrived directly. The general remained at his post as long as the building still stood. Above him, the sky changed again. Not with bombers this time. Not with formations meant to break cities apart. The Mustangs returned in smaller numbers, flying wide lazy arcs over the ruins, as if policing something already subdued. Their presence no longer stirred panic. It stirred recognition. They were not attacking Berlin. They were waiting for it to finish falling. From the streets below came the dull thunder of distant armor. Not air power now. Ground power. Tanks grinding forward through neighborhoods that had not yet learned the war was already over. The illusion of simultaneous battles still lingered among the defenders. Orders were issued. Units were repositioned. But every motion felt delayed, like a conversation spoken after the listener had already left the room. The general sat alone in a narrow office near the heart of the complex. On the desk lay two objects: the prototype folder and a cracked photograph. The photograph showed a younger version of himself beside a boy in a flight uniform. His son, a pilot candidate from the early war years, trained for skies that once promised glory. The photograph was undated. The memory was not. The letter had arrived in 1943. Missing in action over the western frontier. No remains recovered. No aircraft identified. Just absence. For years, the general had believed that loss was a necessary payment demanded by victory. But now, with the war hollowed out around him, the cost finally outweighed the promise. He realized something cold and unmistakable. The war had not taken his son at a moment of turning. It had taken him on a path already sealed by decisions made in rooms like this one. Engineering choices, production shifts, resource priorities. In those quiet places, victories were never truly born, only endings. From the surface came a sudden tremor as a distant detonation shook dust from a ceiling. Concrete cracked farther along the corridor. The city was being entered now, not from the sky, but from the ground. The final phase had begun. The general rose slowly and walked back to the shattered window one last time. Smoke drifted in uneven ribbons over collapsed streets. A transport aircraft lifted from a broken runway far to the south, climbing weakly into the haze with its engine straining. Evacuation continued for those who still had somewhere to go. He did not. For a moment, the sky cleared again, and one final Mustang appeared alone at high altitude. It crossed the city in silence. No escort, no hurry, just passage. The general watched until it vanished beyond the eastern horizon, where the front lines no longer held meaning. That solitary aircraft carried with it every unanswered question still echoing through the wreckage. Who had decided the war's outcome years before the final battles began? Which forgotten engineers had shaped the future without ever seeing its consequences? And how many lives had already been written off by innovations no one had fully understood at the time? He understood now why the Mustangs no longer needed to bomb Berlin. The city had already been defeated by time, by industry, by quiet breakthroughs moving faster than armies. Behind him, the bunker doors rumbled as inner blast shields lowered into place. A final attempt at protection. The sound carried no promise. The general placed the binoculars back on the cracked stone ledge where they had rested at the start. The same glass that had once scanned for enemies now reflected only smoke and fading sunlight. The opening and closing of the story met at the same place. The window, the sky, the turning of history without sound. Somewhere in the depths of the city, gunfire erupted in brief, frantic bursts before fading again into scattered echoes. Flags would soon change. Uniforms would soon change. But the sky would not. The sky already belonged to the future. The general did not wait for surrender orders. He did not wait for rescue. He stood quietly as the final movement of the war passed around him rather than through him. He was no longer a commander. He was a witness. The war had ended first in the air. The ground had only taken longer to understand. And somewhere far beyond Berlin, engineers would soon begin building the next generation of aircraft inspired by battles that had already rewritten everything. The memory of the Mustang dipping its wings remained with him, not as defiance, as confirmation. History had moved on without asking permission, and Berlin had been the last place to find out. If this story of quiet turning points and unseen decisions reached you in any way, subscribe to WW2 Frontline Legends and tell us where in the world you are watching from. Every comment becomes part of the living record.